Before I officially begin, I'd like to introduce Kaylin, who is our ASL interpreter for the evening. We also have live captioning that can be accessed by clicking the live transcript button and clicking show subtitle. Hello and welcome to Take Back the Night 2022, brought to you by the Women's Resource Center here at Portland State University. My name is Christine and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a part of the front desk staff at Portland State's Women's Resource Center. Alongside that, I'm also a Tlingit and Haida, Alaskan Native, first generation, transfer student, and survivor. We are so excited to be gathering with you virtually tonight. We're so grateful for all the folks across campus and beyond that make up the PSU community that's joining us tonight. We're also glad to have family, friends, students, and colleagues from other local institutions, community members near and far, come together to raise awareness and take action against sexual violence in all its forms. Feel free to take a moment to let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. Next slide. Portland State University is located in the heart of downtown Portland in Multnomah County. We pause to honor the indigenous people whose ancestral lands we occupy. The Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of the Chinook, Tualatin Kalapuya, the Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We thank the descendants of these tribes for being the original stewards and protectors of these lands since time immemorial. We also acknowledge that Portland, Oregon, has the 9th largest urban Native American population in the US, with over 380 federally recognized tribes represented in the urban Portland metropolitan area. We also acknowledge the systemic practices and policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous and Native American families today. It's important that we always remember that colonialism is not only a historical fact, it is a current and ongoing process. We are honored by the collective work of many Native nations, leaders, and families who are and have always demonstrated resilience, resistance, revitalization, healing, and creativity. We are honored to be guests upon these lands. We also shoulder a responsibility to make sure our university meaningfully includes Indigenous students and supports making education relevant to our lives. We are grateful for them and continually commit ourselves to solidarity with them and other marginalized folks, especially survivors. To look up whose land you stand on, go to this website. And to see an interactive timeline of major historical events in the US from an Indigenous perspective, follow this link. The timeline includes historically traumatic events, settler colonial policies, and Native resistance movements. Next up, we'd like to go ahead and thank our co-sponsor for their contribution toward Take Back the Night. Many thanks to the Office of Equity and Compliance within the Global Diversity and Inclusion for their support of this event. Moving right along, we'll go ahead and showcase this year's SAM poster. This year's poster was created by our very talented marketing designer, Angela Nowen, with our theme in mind, capturing the essence of collective strength through the interwoven, blooming systems of the rock rose. These plants hold the power to withstand cold winters, hot summers, and even droughts. This natural element that is both beautiful and resilient reflects the transformational path to the survival we share together. Angela, she, her pronouns, is a Vietnamese American artist and designer currently studying graphic design at Portland State. She aims to cultivate curiosity through her visual narratives, which use captivating compositions that explore texture, experimental practices, and childlike imagination. She views the creative process as a way to engage with her inner child, as well as foster connection with her community and beyond. Thank you, Angela. Next up, I know many of you are familiar with Portland State's Women's Resource Center, but for those of you that aren't, we'd love to introduce ourselves. The WRC is a department housed within Portland State's Student Affairs Division. We offer programming to support the personal and professional and academic development of our students. We also have support services and leadership opportunities. We also create events and spaces for students to engage in community, learn, and celebrate feminist identities. Feminism is multifaceted, and feminism and a feminist lens, can be applied to pretty much everything. Each year, we select a focus, a central theme to tie together the work that we do, the learning and unlearning we constantly engage in, and the daily ways we practice our values and politics. Collective self-determination is used often in the context of nation states and the rights and autonomy of groups and communities to self-determine what they need to self-govern and lead themselves. It's also used more broadly to speak to the community or collective effort to self-determine the resources and conditions that best liberates. Often, this self-determination is in opposition to those in power who seek to maintain dominant culture. Self-determination is, at its core, about the right to choose, our autonomy that honors the truth of our own needs and wants and hopes and dreams. This calls into question the way that others, systems, people, institutions, ideologies, etc., assign, prescribe, force upon, deny, or determine for us what we know we need. Self-determination, in the way we mean to use it, is about shifting power and moving us closer to our collective freedom and liberation. Collective self-determination is then our way of saying we cannot work for our own individual liberation, but our collective liberation. Power, transformation, and accountability are three concepts, ideas, values, frameworks that inform the way we build toward a more just and self-determined future. Power informs everything, and there is power weaponized to oppress, harm, and maintain control. And there is power that is used to reduce harm and dismantle conditions that work against our freedom. Transformation is the commitment to and belief in change in ourselves, in others, and in our now and future. Accountability is one of the ways we see our collective liberation as possible. Self-accountability asks us to consider our own impact on ourselves and others. Community accountability asks those who harm to change and repair and experience the consequences of their actions to stop this harm from happening again. Accountability as a framework asks us to consider the conditions that led to the harm and work to change these conditions. We were so happy to have two workshops centering around this year's theme. Last week, Claire Barrera hosted Play, Heal, Explore, Transform, where they led folks in a series of somatic and improvisational activities to explore all of these things: self and co-regulation, agency and consent, and imaginative work. Thanks again for everyone who attended this workshop. Just yesterday, we had Vovo take participants through reflections on arenas of well-being and current circumstances in their contexts where they have agency and power and where they can take or let go of action. This exploratory work is the beginning of recognizing personal directions, limitations, and boundary setting. We are so excited and so grateful that both Claire and Vo will be joining us tonight as well. So, why do we do this? Each year at Portland State, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, SAM, centers the voices of survivors across campus and in the larger Portland community. In 1973, Take Back the Night was birthed by folks in San Francisco protesting the serial murders and violence against women of color in Los Angeles. This effort has and continues to work toward eliminating sexual and domestic violence in all forms through providing a space for awareness, community, and action. The Women's Resource Center at Portland State has hosted Take Back the Night since 1999. Collectively, we welcome you to help center how our futures are all interconnected and that a truly violence free culture must offer safety, dignity, and access for us all. We have immense gratitude to the many folks on campus who've helped make Take Back the Night and SAM possible over the years. Here's a quick glance back at the past few Take Back the Night events. In 2018, our theme centered around disrupting the prototype, who gets believed as survivors. 2019, our theme centered around we are worthy, combating disposability and honoring our inherent worthiness. The following year, our theme centered around disability justice and sexual violence, power, healing, and interdependence. And last year's theme focused on we are each other's future, resistance, resilience, and interdependence. And again, we're so glad to have you here for our discussion tonight on collective self-determination, power, transformation, and accountability. I am so excited to welcome and introduce our amazing moderator, who we've had with us before in 2020 for a conversation on dismantling carceral feminism, Zubi Azubuike. Zubi is an African, Jaleji, queer, two-spirit, disabled femme. They are the founder and executive director of Black and Beyond the Binary Collective and creator of the Umoja Kijana Shuja program. Raised in a working-class household guided by their mother, the fight for liberation is nothing new to them. They believe our collective healing, including healing the planet, is key to liberation. Their vision is guided by an abolitionist, pro-Palestine, intersectional Black queer feminism.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. OCO, hello everyone. As mentioned, my name is Zabi Azbuike. My pronouns are they, them. I am going to be helping to guide the conversation for tonight. And so I just want to take some time to introduce each one of our panelists, which I'm really, really excited for this conversation. It should be very, very juicy. So, before we get started, I do just want to check in about my access needs. I am hearing impaired, so I'll be focusing on the captions and going back and forth between my little script that I have here. I just ask that folks speak loudly, slowly, and clearly so the ASL interpreter and the captioner can capture all of this brilliance that we're about to drop on y'all. And so without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce our first panelist. Next slide. Awesome. So our first panelist is Anna So. Anna So, pronouns she and they, is a queer Asian abolitionist organizer living in Portland, Oregon. Anna grew up in New York, where they began organizing over 17 years ago as a youth in the anti-war action, and since then has been involved in LGBTQ, reproductive justice, anti-gentrification, and other organizing formations aiming to abolish the prison industrial complex. Currently, they are passionate about everyday abolitionist practice, healthcare access, in advocating for the decriminalization of sex work. Anna is a member of Critical Resistance and a supporter of Decrim Oregon, and has volunteered with Outside In as a clinic assistant at Project Erase. She's working towards a nursing degree and has a BA in English and Women and Gender Studies from Barnard College. Welcome, Anna. Awesome. Next slide, please. Wonderful. Vo is a radical educator of 11 years in over 20 countries in inclusion, racial justice, intercultural communication, trauma-informed care, de-escalation, and transformative justice. Editor of an internationally renowned publication, speaker, curator, artist, and musician who has exhibited and toured Australia, Germany, Indonesia, the Netherlands, Singapore, Croatia, Mexico, Finland, Denmark, New Zealand, Vietnam, Sweden, Malaysia, and the States. Their recent initiated career as a visual artist has seen them primarily work in textiles, embroidery, weaving, and furniture building. Their installation seeks to interrogate power dynamics, structural oppression, challenge histories and realities of imperialism, white supremacy, and colonization. They continue to explore support strategies and models of community care within a post-traumatic social landscape, focusing on the resilience of BIPOC, LGBTQA2S+, and disabled communities. Welcome, Vo. Next slide, please. And last but not least, Claire Barrera. Claire Barrera is an artist, activist, and educator based in Portland, Oregon. They have participated in anti-violence movements for over 2 decades, focusing on healing, transformative, and racial justice. Currently, they work with Multnomah County and organize with Brown Girl Rise, shout out. Their book with Meredith Butner, When Language Runs Dry, was published by Men My Dress Press in 2020, a forthcoming intergenerational dance project focusing on play as a site of discipline and transformation will be presented May 20th through 22nd of this year at Performance Works Northwest. Welcome, Claire. Next slide. So, are we taking a break right now? I don't think so. So we are actually about to get into it, I believe. Just double checking. Are we taking a break right now? Okay, cool. I think we're moving forward. Sorry, it's been a long week. We're coming from all over the places, everyone. It took a lot for us to arrive to this place here right now. So we're just gonna roll with that. So yeah, we're about to get into it. I wanted to open up, especially since this year's theme is really around collective self-determination, focusing on power, transformation, and accountability. Those are some really, really juicy, really big words. And I want to really get into this piece around collective determination. So I guess we'll kind of start there. Can y'all tell us about the meaning that this concept / topic has had for you in relation to your work? And any particular panelist that wants to jump out and lead with that, I'll hand it off to whomever wants to speak first. Don't be shy. It's a very small question.
I'll make some quick comments about it, I guess, to start us off. I think that kind of whatever context that you exist in, you know, you're probably experiencing some institutions trying to direct or control or dominate what you do, right? So either the institution, when I say institutions, I mean like actual institutions like schools or organizations or government or the justice system, or more abstract institutions like sexism, transphobia, ableism. And so self-determination for not just myself, obviously, but for my community members, which I would hope to continue to support, is the work of who do we want to be without the pressure from any of those institutions? How would we like to exist if we didn't have to listen to or be drowned out by those demands of those institutions? So it's a kind of a short version.
Ooh.
Add to that, I thought Christine read something about PSU's WRC's definition that I thought touched on a lot of stuff, but adding to that and what Vo shared, I was thinking when I was thinking about this phrase a little bit about how we believe that survivors know what's best for themselves and are experts in their own experience. And that this is like a way of extending that to the broader communities or collective. And I think a lot about how right now, most of us live in worlds kind of like I was saying, where power is centralized. And I think collective self-determination for me is about decentralizing power and decision-making, because we all live in like multiple communities, and those communities are all very different, and there's no one right way to do anything because there's too many ways of being, too many cultures, too many environments that people live in. And so finding a way to collectivize, like it doesn't make sense to have power centralized in a way that like creates these sort of like blanket rules for large groups of people. Where there's no room for difference or nuance or complexity, which is not what people in power want anyway, because they want to maintain power, as Bo said. So for me, collective determination is about trusting that people and collectives of people are experts in their own lives and experiences and environments, and that those things need to be, those decisions need to be decentralized and adaptive to the different ways people are living and the different solutions that work for different communities.
Yeah, I guess I will add on to that. I think when I was thinking about collective self-determination and like community organizing or campaign organizing, I think that is also a lot about thinking about what our values are, because in terms of, you know, like Claire, you said, collective, there's a lot of different people, different communities. Everybody has kind of like different perspectives. And I think it's also important to think about, you know, how to work within that and get also other people to think about like those forces that influence people's decisions or what they consider to be self-determination. A lot of times I think about, you know, a lot of people will be like, oh, there's a person who's making this very selfish decision or something. And to me, I think a lot of times I think about, well, maybe that person also, there are all these other forces that are impacting the decisions that they make. And I think for me, it is definitely a lot about thinking about those systems and how it interacts with these values that we hold. And hopefully if collectively we can kind of think about those together, we can, you know, work towards making certain decisions together.
Yeah. Thank y'all for sharing so much. Like, I feel like everyone kind of touched on a few things that kind of struck a chord for me. And the first thing that comes to mind is that like our society loves binaries. it's like it's right, it's wrong, it's this or it's that, and there's no room for gray area. And I feel like what I really pulled from what y'all were saying was really having some level of nuance around thinking about what does liberation look like for any community, because there might be overlap, and at the same time, like each community has its own specific needs that need to be recognized. And kind of leads me into this other question as well, just thinking about like nuance and collective determination and collective liberation. This, I have to bring it up because I feel like I want to talk about accountability. Just because accountability is like a buzzwords these days, and it's used without a lot of consistent meaning. And so I'm curious, thinking about some of that nuance, like how do y'all talk about accountability and what kind of accountability do you work to center in the work that y'all are doing right now? Also, we can sit with that question too, because
No, I'm like, I feel like it's interesting because I was sharing before this started that I just came from a workshop where, well, it wasn't a workshop, it was a conversation that I was leading about what does justice mean in cases of sexual violence. And we got into some of this stuff in there, and I was noticing this was a group of younger people, and I was noticing how easy it was for us to say the word accountability, but how hard it was for all of us to then get more specific. I kept kind of encouraging folks to be like, what do you mean when you say accountability? And it was really hard for folks to know in, and I'm sure some of that is just the sort of exhaustion and trauma and stuff that we all experience, like really shuts down imagination in a lot of ways. So it can be really difficult to project into other ways of doing things, even though we want to. And I'll be honest that I feel like I grapple with this myself as somebody who has been in transformative justice processes, as someone who also provides like services to survivors. And I've really recently seen some of the tension around how like all this energy has been moved towards accountability and healing for harmers and away from like care and justice for survivors. And there's a lot of tension. And I think when you were talking about binaries, Zabi, I was thinking about how like that tension we feel is a bad thing, but actually tension between like the self and the collective, or self and other, and like healing for survivors versus accountability and healing for perpetrators. These are all like generative tensions if we can allow them to be, but this is not an answer to your question. It's just some of like the thoughts that are coming up for me. I feel like I'm still constantly striving to figure out what accountability is. And of course, it's also dependent on the unique factors of each situation and what feels like accountability to someone. And there's also accountability to an individual versus accountability to a community. And those can look really different and can be in tension with each other as well. I'm going to stop there for now. I just added more questions to this conversation.
I can add to that. Ashley, go ahead, Anna. I saw you on mute.
Oh yeah, I also wanted to add to that, and there are just so many questions. And I think in my own life, I think in some ways it feels maybe almost impossible to like try to get people who have, harmed me to be accountable. So that is very difficult. And in those cases, I think I look to, well, hopefully, we can have a lot of resources to try and, build and teach younger people how to be accountable to themselves and the people around them, so that maybe in the future it will be more possible. And then in terms of thinking about like healing and accountability, for myself, when I was much younger doing criminalized work, I had been assaulted by a law enforcement officer. And that was, I think for me, I just struggled so hard to try and figure out a way to deal with that and to, I don't want to say maybe heal from that, but to be, I don't know, to try and be accountable to myself and other survivors, or people who have survived that type of violence. And I think that has come through for me in abolitionist organizing, because to me, that is trying to reduce the violence of policing and surveillance, and criminalization is a way to try and prevent violence and also challenge the violence that was done. And yeah, I think that for me, that's kind of like where that goes. But also, it's everything is such a question because there's so much that is like feels like it will always be unresolved. And yeah, that's kind of, I guess that's kind of what I think about. But for me, a lot of that work towards like accountability and trying to transform things is through abolitionist organizing as well.
Cool. I think I had a couple of comments. One, that first step is like, what is an agreement on what the definition is for the situation, and being centered in a survivor-led process, meaning accountability would be defined by people who were harmed, or by survivors. Very often, publicly or in other situations, people seem to mistake accountability for an apology, which I think are completely different things. So yeah, I think accountability is not an apology. That's one of my answers. Number two, when I'm doing organizational work or collective accountability, I talk about like, I'm not usually a word person, but like accountability, taking into account or doing your accounts. So like other words I would use as an audit or a check-in, or like kind of literally just, taking a minute to reflect on the exchanges of power that are in the situation. And so that means your power and the power of those around you in the community or in the collective. And they're like Zobi said, it's not a binary of perpetrator and survivor. It is a community of people that are in a system that allows things to happen or enables things to happen. So how do we all take into account all of the different pullings and pushings of the network that we are part of, and which represent the power that we do or don't have? And then how do we continue to be aware of those things moving forward? How do we acknowledge harm caused, take into account the power that we have in the situation and learn from it, and how do we commit to doing better? So again, I'm really summarizing a lot, but that's the best way I can like quickly answer that question from my point of view.
Yeah. That brings me to another question. Actually, I'm going off script, so I'm just gonna ask this question. But yeah, I feel like as a survivor, and who has a lot of friends who are survivors, I'm curious on y'all's thoughts around the way that social media kind of plays a role in preventing like transformative conversation or space for accountability to actually happen. Because like Instagram call outs, Facebook call outs, those things are very prominent in our culture. And I know that there's like this weird narrative around like cancel culture and all these other things, but also that generative tension that Claire, that you were talking about around like having a survivor actually feel supported and doing what they need to do to feel heard, and also creating space for like a transformative reimagining of like what healing could possibly look like on both ends. Does that, I don't know if that's a question or y'all understand what I'm saying, but I'm having all kinds of like things coming up just thinking about what y'all are saying.
Yeah, I've seen, different versions of those public conversations, and some of them are not survivor led. Some of them are incredibly binary, i.e., you're in or you're out. They're isolationists, or they're punitive, or they're. So I think social media is a tool, and it's another aspect of the power that we do have access to. It's how you use that tool to move away from a binary maybe response and into a transformative response. And I think it can be wielded as a transformative tool. Other people?
Yeah, I agree with you, Vo. I think I tend to just be like, oh, can we just get away from doing stuff online? And then I often have to check myself and be like, online stuff is a huge resource to disabled folks and like trans folks and stuff in so many ways, right? And I have to think through, why is it that I have this aversion, and what are the ways it can create access? And I've seen similar things to what Bo is saying. I think the problem with online accountability is it's a tool, and I think it could be used in a way that's useful as part of a larger process, but in and of itself, it's not very transformative, right? Because deep work happens in relationship, and like deep change happens in relationship, like whether that's relationship to land and place, or relationship to people in our community, or animals and plants in our community. And it happens where we have like investment in each other. And I don't have any investment in some random person online. I may still care, right? Like I care about things that happen on a global scale or a national scale, but I don't have a lot of power to like, I don't have an investment that's personal in that. And I don't have day-to-day like embodied connection and like agency. And that's the kind of connection that really helps transformative justice processes be meaningful and long lasting. And that shit takes time. It is slow, right? Like it's not a quick one-off action. It's like staying with people in very uncomfortable situations, offering support to each other, getting secondary support, like, and being held on a larger scale. And so I think there's ways we can utilize online spaces to remind us to go back into community. And that's what interests me when I'm thinking about online spaces, is like, how are the ways we're engaging with social media reminding us to also, or exciting us or motivating us to like also then go back into our relationships and our communities, and be agents of change and care in those spaces.
Yeah, thanks, Will and Claire. I think a lot of what you both said really resonated with me. So much of what I guess social media is currently is very much like algorithm based on likes and retweets, these very, very quick interactions. And, kind of like that to me is, I guess, where social media is right now and how those platforms make money, and how things get seen. But also, I think, in that hope of there is some power in connecting online, and it also is a space for, where that is more accessible for people. I think, that I would hope that there is a way to like have more long-term conversations or more engaged one-on-one conversations in those spaces. But I'm not sure if it's possible. I hope so. But like, I think those like chat rooms and those kind of like older versions of the internet aren't really around anymore. And I think also another challenge that like social media poses is when something becomes popular, like a hashtag. I will use the example of Stop Asian Hate. It becomes kind of like a very kind of like, people will repost that as, oh, they're doing something, or this actually means something. But when I look at that hashtag, to me, what it has been or what it looked like was kind of like a call for more policing and more surveillance of people by more privileged, wealthier, maybe celebrities or other people who are not the most impacted by the violence that happened that was because of people's immigration status or criminalized work or their social location, their social context. I feel like that kind of is completely taken out when social media is used as a way to get people, I don't know, to think about an issue. Or I guess it helps people to feel like they understand or are doing something when there is very minimal and very surface level engagement.
Yeah, and I just wanted to refer back to what we both said, and obviously when either hashtag or any conversation or anyone's actual experience and suffering gets used as currency in the social capital sense, those are the kinds of things in capitalism that we want to avoid. I think I just wanted to share and to reiterate Claire's point, to share from a personal point of view as a survivor who has initiated a public call out in the past. It was an incredible resource to in a time that felt so lonely and felt so hard and felt so painful, and where I didn't feel supported. It was a really helpful tool for me to find friends and allies and support and from people I'd never met before. So I think there's a lot of, I just want to reiterate what Claire said around how much of a tool it can be for someone who's has nowhere else to go maybe, or doesn't want to go through channels that maybe other people normally do. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank y'all. I feel like there's so many good points here that I kind of want to pull. But just like, again, the word nuance comes to mind around like the way that we engage with social media. On like the one hand, there's this space, amazing space, because I'm like, I have so many like queer and trans internet friends I've never met, but like we've known each other online for like 8 years, like, that have been like really amazing points of support. And simultaneously also, like social media is a place where many of us are heavily surveilled. Like Anna was saying, there's like all these different algorithms that exist that we know certain races of people and genders of people don't actually get heard or seen online. So it's like a both and in that regard. So I appreciate y'all for highlighting those specific things. And then I guess kind of like continuing to pull on that thread, outside of like just online, what kind of transformative justice like centered futures do y'all hope to be a part of building as we're thinking about moving to a place to give more agency to survivors, as well as extending compassion to those that have caused harm? Because ultimately, we're all going to cause somebody harm. Like it's inevitable. It's a part of being human. So, yeah.
Okay. I think I have always seen myself as being part of an intergenerational body of work, for the next 100 years, for the next 200 years, and for my ancestors in the past several generations. So I think that the work that I do is aspirational in the sense that it may not make sense even in this current system that we live in, but I work as if that system doesn't, I work as if the system I want to exist does exist. That's me being vague, but I think specifically a lot of the work I do, the trauma-informed, support that I do, and the support that I bring in after harm is caused, the ideal is that it's preventative. The ideal is that all of this accountability work is in the interest of preventing further harm, and that can be work that is kind of internal and looks at how you are contextualized in your community and how you connect to things. It can be things like seeing what patterns of behavior do you as an individual or as an organization partake in, and how can you minimize harm in the future. What are we all complicit in, and what power and strength do we have that we can also rally. So I think it's, for me, I do see it, a lot of it as preventative, as how do we build skills and knowledge now so that when things are happening to our friends, to our chosen family, we can name it and address it, and not be part of an enabling society where those things go unnamed.
Can go. I think I in the work that I try to do, I would hope that we can actually have very like practical things that we do every day that does help us to be accountable to ourselves and other people, and that we can build that support that we need for when we are harmed or when we harm other people. And one thing that has been super helpful to me to think about that is the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective's pod mapping exercise. And beyond just doing that exercise in like workshops or other things, I think like really with the people, like connecting with people, and always like even encouraging them in a way to kind of do that, even if you're not saying, oh, this is pod mapping, but maybe just asking questions of like, oh, what do you think you would do if like this happened? Who would you call? Like, what would you do? And so, Vo, what you said really like resonated with me about when you were saying like you kind of hoping that like all of this accountability work is preventative. And I think that also to me feels like a way to kind of build a future or a present, build a present that is preventative of violence and also supports our healing as well. And I think really having that connection to other people, I know for me has been very important, in terms of feeling like abolition is possible, or that I have, the support that I need to do the things that that we need to do in this world. So that's kind of, I guess that's kind of what I hope for. It's also kind of vague, but yeah, that's that's what I see in terms of future things and present things.
I want to echo what Vo said about like intergenerational work and how important that is. I think as somebody who also does a lot of like intergenerational work and has a lot of intergenerational community, I really see the ways that communication flows across generations is so helpful. I feel like excited that my child is growing up knowing what transformative justice is at a very young age, and a lot of their peers do. And they're able to get that information from those of us who've been like working on that for a long time, and I'm sure we'll imagine many improvements to what we've done. I have some like more immediate future dreams as somebody who works in the system right now, which is that like I have this dream that will in the next 10 years move from a service, like a nonprofit service model, to like a model where communities are trained to do their own and like given direct funds to do their own work, including transformative justice work. And so that's like a more immediate dream. And I think like also cultural workers, I think like Vo, who kind of sit at the intersection of like creative work as well as like healing and justice work also allow some of that like support around building our muscles of nuance that you are naming, Zubby, where it's like, how can we strengthen our ability to like live with nuance? Because nuance is really, can be really uncomfortable and scary. And I think particularly when you've survived trauma, like most of us have, not having concrete black and white answers can also be really scary. So I think like helping people build those muscles around sitting with complexity and sitting with I harm and I am harmed, and sitting with, and like building the muscle that Bo was saying about like reaching towards like an imagined future as if it were now. I think the arts really help with that kind of living in that kind of space. So I dream of like more of those skills being built through the kinds of work that Anna and Bo are both doing. And that will give people more capacity for getting into some of the nitty gritty of transformative justice work.
Yeah, I have so many questions. I feel like we could just stay here talking all night. I'm going off script again. I feel like I have to tell y'all. But I'm just curious, specifically, especially like I feel like abolition has kind of been alongside this conversation the whole time. And so I'm curious about the ways that y'all have seen the state fail survivors. And yeah, is it possible for the state to get justice for survivors?
I also noticed that Anna maybe didn't answer the last question. So I don't know if you wanted to, Anna.
What was the last question?
I don't know if you had anything to add to the last question as well about futures. But yeah, and in relation to this question also.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I guess I would say I do. I think in terms of like trying to make the connections and build like relationships with people who are there to, who can support each other and support other people in doing that and encourage other people to do that. I guess I feel like that is the future that I want to build, and hopefully that is also going to be building the present. But I think it also in terms of abolition and thinking about, whether, to me, I mean, my immediate reaction is I don't think I will find any sort of healing or accountability or justice from the state, because to me that really comes from people who you're in relationship with, the person who harmed, if that's what you're wanting, and then what if there's anything the state could provide, it is I guess financial resources or other resources that they basically have taken from people anyway. So that's not I'm not sure if that's 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 what they can provide, return the resources they have stolen.
Yeah, that is most certainly a word. That is not your money. This is not your land. Return it. Yeah, so I'm curious. Also, sorry, Anna, I'm like really excited about this conversation. So, but I wanted to go back and create some space for Yuvo and Claire to kind of like name around like the ways that the state can actually support or impede justice for survivors.
I'm like, unmute. I mean, I think I work for the county, so I work for the state. And so I maybe obviously believe that there are band-aids that the state can offer, crumbs that the state can offer in terms of some of these aspects of anti-violence work, including services and support for survivors, policy change. I haven't really ever, well, I don't know. In domestic and sexual violence work, I haven't seen any accountability work done at the state. I have seen there be some decent, some survivor support done through the state. I've never seen what I would consider justice done through the state. Maybe some survivors feel safe. Maybe some survivors have a subjective experience of justice, but not the majority. So beyond that, my answer would be no, it's not possible to have full experiences of like healing and justice through the state for reasons that we mentioned earlier, like that the state can never be nuanced enough to like meet the needs of such diverse communities and populations and individuals. And the state will always prioritize maintaining its power, which is always going to be at the cost or at the expense of communities and survivors. You know, the state has been really interested in restorative justice recently, or they'll put on like workshops about transformative justice, but there's literally never an implementation, right? Because they're not interested in dismantling their own power, and it never will be. So that's my answer.
Yeah, to expand on that, transformative justice is expensive, right? So because it's complex, and so that's kind of sometimes a reason given why that model isn't adopted so eagerly, and that's why sometimes it ends up falling on community groups to lead those efforts. But you brought up I just had a lot of from this, which is the state being and also I am currently being paid by a state entity as well. So just for transparency there. But yeah, we understand that the state and other institutions are, from a colonial perspective, are probably trying to offer one-size-fits-all solutions, probably cheaper solutions, i.e. out of sight, out of mind, punitive, surveillance or control, inspired. And how do we track these people more than how do we heal these people, right? So from my observation, survivors of DV and SA are abandoned by the state. Then I don't often observe a real rallying around and building rich community for survivors, for those survivors. I see the opposite, which is services and or resources going towards maybe punishing people who've caused harm, but not necessarily a holistic approach to, okay, you're a person, you're in a family, you're in a community, what do you all need? What are things that we can provide that go beyond the situation, but go to your mental health and your well-being? And yeah. And then I had another thought, but I think I've forgotten that already. Nuance, the state, power. Yeah, okay, I think that's good for now.
Yeah, y'all all had some really good nuggets in there. And really, ultimately, the state shows up after harm has happened. I think that's a thing that people often forget, is like, it's not like you could call the police. Usually they won't do anything or show up until someone's either harmed or something worse has happened. So I appreciate y'all naming the ways that, there is not enough nuance in our current system to actually provide justice. And that really sucks. But ultimately, I think that what y'all are speaking to around transformative justice is like it's a community-based approach. And so I'm curious if there are any starting places that y'all would recommend for folks who want to learn more about getting involved in local work that supports like transformative justice built future and abolitionist future. Where are those places that folks can kind of plug in like right now? I know y'all have mentioned a little bit about your work, but I would love to hear more.
So yeah, the thing I forgot to say earlier was I primarily work in schools or with young people because I think it's important to build this language and understanding of repairing harm from a really young age, and rupture in relationship and repair. So I think, you know, one of my answers to this question is how do you talk to young people about this idea, and start with the people in your community, but that might be starting a program in the school that your kids are in, or, you know, like talk to your neighbors. But yeah, I think really understanding the school to prison pipeline and dismantling that as soon as you can, as quickly as you can. And then a book, I think I'll just share it in the chat if that's possible, and then maybe you all can share it in the YouTube. But it's a really good compilation of stories from the TJ movement, and it's helpful because it's a lot of different aspects, a lot of different communities, a lot of different contexts, so that you can read through all the different examples and maybe pull out what is helpful for you in your context. So that's my first recommendation.
Yeah, I also, another suggestion I'd have to add on to those is the Creative Interventions Toolkit, which is also has a lot of stories and examples of ways to intervene on violence. And I think one thing I do feel strongly about right now, actually, is that kind of like Vo said, it's really important to talk to youth and teach them about, you know, repair and a lot of other things, because from a lot of times from what I've seen, if like there's an institution that has some sort of preset process or something, all of these kind of like pre-made kind of almost cookie cutter processes I don't think lead to healing, accountability, or justice in any way. So I think in terms of creating that, like certain containers, I think for accountability, if you want to call it that, or you know, to prevent violence, it's important, I think, to actually have those created like for certain specific situations or within your own context, in order for it to be really effective. And I think for me, I feel like strongly that that's where energy should go. But also I have received really, I think, good mediation support from like Resolutions Northwest. So that's another, you know, other resources to get support, but I think there always should be more social type of supports for learning about transformative justice. And yeah.
Ditto both Anna and Vo, ditto to working with young people. Like I see the work that I do with Brown Girl Rise as involving a lot of transformative justice, even though we're not like doing community accountability processes. We're, like Vo said, talking with youth all the time about harm and repair, and building like deep relationship and like prevention of harm. And then beyond that, I definitely like ditto also the books and organizations that Anna and Vo both mentioned. And then I'm just going to post in the chat the link to the resources page of Philly Stands Up, which was an accountability collective that I did some work with in the past, and they just have a nice resource page that names a lot of different options. There are some folks doing active training around community accountability, and one of those organizations that I would name is API Chaya in Seattle, where they went from having workshops on transformative justice where then nothing happened, but you like went to a 101, to like actively training people how to do it in their own community. So like giving away more concrete information on now you go do it yourself, which I think is more meaningful. And I'll grab that link and put it in the chat too. They're obviously not based in Portland, but I think it's a place to get more information.
Yeah, y'all are dropping all kinds of like amazing gems in the chat. So folks that are kind of tuning in to the Zoom, I would just go ahead, click on them, save them. Maybe we'll send them out afterwards. But yeah, I co-sign all of these. I appreciate y'all for sharing that. I did kind of have a bit of a deeper question for you, Anna, just because you mentioned pod mapping earlier and wanted to see if you could say a little bit more about what that is. And yeah, just more about what pod mapping is.
Yeah, so pod mapping is basically, I believe it was developed by Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective and Mia Mingus, and it's basically kind of thinking about your networks that you have and who you would call in cases where you were harmed, or if you had harmed somebody else. So in both ways, accountability and also healing, or I think also there's also if in some sense you had a medical or mental health emergency, who you would call for that. And you know, it is an exercise, but it actually is like a very long-term thing, because I think a lot of times you can think about it, and maybe there isn't somebody or a few people who who you'd call in a situation, but as many situations as you can think of, because every context is different. But you kind of try to learn how to build the relationships that would support kind of asking for that support. And also in that way, you can tell people, I'm also here to support you if you need this type of support. And then it is also about kind of mapping people's skills, kind of what skills you might have to support people or resources, and then asking others what skills and resources might they have to support others. So it is kind of very broad, and it can be a very specific shorter term exercise, but a longer term kind of like a life practice of how to build out your community, basically.
I like how that can connect to a safety plan or a crisis plan or other types of practices as well.
Yeah, just listening to you talk, it just makes me think about like those deeper networks of care that we have. Like if there's a crisis or anything, who am I going to call? Is it going to be my friend who's terrible in a crisis? Maybe. Or is it going to be my friend who's like, oh, I got this, cool, calm and collected, So just kind of mapping that ahead of time. So I think we're actually at a really good stopping point. I appreciate you for offering that explanation, Anna, and want to give all of our panelists like a time to take a bio break, a sip of water, maybe stretch your legs. I know I'm feeling a little bit of tension in my legs at this moment. So we're going to take a break. I'm not sure, I think maybe about 5 minutes. So we'll come back at 7:20. And I think I believe we'll do some Q&A from the folks who are here. And so we will be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back. Claire, I see you put on sweatpants. Congratulations. Welcome to the club. I was wearing sweatpants all day. Exactly. Sweatpants gang. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. I hope folks have had a chance to grab some water, go to the bathroom, or put on something more comfortable. We are now going to shift and do some questions pulled from our webinar participants. And let's see. I'll just kind of go off some of these questions. I think the first one that comes to mind, I really like this question. I'm wondering, given that incarceration is a form of sexual violence, control of people, sexual autonomy, and the legal and non-legal harms, and how policing happens through sexual violence, would love to hear about work that is happening now or has happened in the past that is confronting policing in prisons in Oregon that touches on this vision of a different present and future. I'm going to put that in the chat because that was kind of a long question. Yeah, so panelists can take a look at that for a moment. And anyone who feels called to respond, please do.
I can answer that, I think. Being in critical resistance Portland, I feel like a lot of the work in the past has been to, with the Care Not Cops campaign, to defund policing and to end the gang policing unit of the PPB. So I think that has been something that really, I would say, raised awareness within Portland about the role of policing in the city. And then I would say more recently, there's a group called the Oregon Prisoner Coalition that Critical Resistance Portland has been a part of, and is also kind of looking at Measure 11, which is a mandatory minimum sentencing bill that was passed in '94, I believe. So that is something that I think people are kind of thinking about and working on right now. Yeah.
I haven't done a ton of like prison abolition work, so I'm not a super big expert on this. But one thing I can share that is something to like kind of be aware of and keep your eye on in Oregon and Multnomah County right now is that over the last few years, there's been various efforts at decriminalizing sex work in Oregon. So 2 years ago, there was an attempt to get senators to pass a bill that would decriminalize youth who are still can still be arrested for prostitution in Oregon. And that did not make it past whatever it is called when the senators hang out and decide whether to move it forward. I always forget the political language. And then this year, there's been some efforts to put decriminalization of sex work on a ballot measure with very mixed sort of results, lots of different critiques of the way that was attempted to be done. But it's up right now and people are talking about it a lot, and there's talk about like more things in the future. So I just really, I see that as like decriminalizing survivorship in addition to sex work, and it's very closely tied to like sexual violence and sex trafficking, and ensuring that like survivors are not detained or incarcerated where further violence happens. So I just encourage folks to like stay tuned and keep like your eye out as more things develop in that realm.
Yeah, I second Care Not Cops and Critical Resistance, local organizations, Liberation to Literacy, Pink and Black, Books to Prisoners. There's a lot of really awesome organizing in Portland. So if you want to get involved, there's lots of opportunities to do that. On a interpersonal level, de-arrest people when you can, if you feel comfortable doing that, or you know, just like some 101 bystander intervention stuff, which is if you see people being intimidated or abused by law enforcement, how can you make yourself useful as a witness or as a as someone who's asking, you know, asking what's going on, or de-escalating, etc. So yeah, I think there's lots of different kind of levels that you can get involved locally or as a community member.
I did just want to mention just one thing about the about decriminalization and those I would say it was a petition, I believe, for a ballot measure that was submitted this year. And I would say that for sure decriminalization is something that is very, very important. I think some of the critiques that were the concerning things was that it also seemed to kind of pave the way for like a soft legalization where there would be like certain committees that were created. And in terms of organizing and kind of like trying to get people behind something, I think it's important to point those things out because those are ways that could increase interaction with policing, or if it's like an argument that's using, oh, if we do this or this rule changes, then more people would be able to come to police if there was a crime, quote unquote, crime that happened. And I feel like those are ways that can kind of actually make more challenges or be more challenging for the people who are most impacted, who are already policed and who are already criminalized. So I think it's, you know, for sure decriminalization extremely important, and also important to kind of think about what impacts that could have in the future, those other parts of it.
Thank y'all for sharing that. I feel like this is, for folks to know, this is a good group of folks to be asking these questions. Y'all are all very much in the know. So I appreciate you bringing your wisdom and making it really local. So I appreciate that. The next question that I really want to ask is, what perspectives and or strengths can be brought by being a survivor who works to help survivors? And I'll put this question in the chat as well.
Oh my gosh, so many good things about being a survivor who works to help other survivors. And of course, people who aren't survivors can be great allies in this work too. And obviously there's lived experience expertise that is irreplaceable, right? It's not an exact comparison, but like, you know, similarly to being somebody who's like a native speaker of a language versus somebody who learned it, or somebody who's bicultural versus somebody who has like visited another culture or built some relationship but isn't from the culture. There's rapport, and there's understanding, and there's trust that can be built in really, really special ways that can create like significant healing for everyone. And I think that's one of the cool things, is that the healing can go both ways. Like it's healing as a survivor myself. Like one of the most healing things I've done is do this work and also be an activist in this work. And in some ways more healing than like therapy I've done and stuff is like being a change agent. And like, so I think that there's just such an incredible opportunity for deep healing and empowerment that goes both directions. And of course, it can be really challenging too. Sometimes as survivors, we conflate our experience as the same as everyone else's, and that can be really problematic, because just because we've experienced something doesn't mean that all survivors have had the same experience as us. So, you know, that can be hard. But for the most part, I think survivors doing the work is incredible. And I feel like survivors notice how things can be done better and what's not working, and advocate exceptionally passionately for other survivors in ways that people who haven't experienced it don't always do.
I also think this is a really big question, because it's pretty much the thing that informs my entire, you know, like everything that I do. I think this is something I say a lot when at the beginning of when I give a training or facilitate a session, which is that whatever you end up doing, like even if you get, you know, if you start a nonprofit or whatever, don't lose sight of what it feels like to be from the outside coming into any of these situations, or coming into a service, or coming into trying to navigate like help, or like there's just always like try to center the perspective and experience of someone who might not be having an easy time, and is getting re-traumatized by so many systems, and if you kind of center that, I think, and listen, like Claire said, listen to folks, I think we would have a better harm reduction model if people could remember, you know, what it feels like, and yeah, how to be more humanizing and compassionate with folks when interacting with them.
Yeah, so much of what Vil and Claire said resonates with me. And I think I also try to think about, you know, I think when we use the term survivor, it is very refers to sexual violence, but also I think I like to contextualize that, and that sexual violence is always intersecting with so many other violences, like colonialist violence, anti-Black violence, transphobia, all of these other violences. And I think for me, I kind of try to have a very expansive understanding of the term survivor, because a lot of people have lived through or survived a lot of different types of violence. I think coming from there, like like you said, Claire, not everybody's experience is the same, but to really kind of like trust other people's, I guess not trust, but like just really kind of try to, I think it does as a survivor help you to understand where people are coming from. And then also part of me, I also feel is important to not assume that I understand as well. That's kind of, I guess, where I come from with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really helpful to think about. Like, I really like what you said, Anna, around like how many of us are living through violence constantly. And so there's like the emphasis put on this one specific type of violence, while there's like constant violence happening to many of us constantly around the clock. So I appreciate y'all for lifting that up and sharing your experience. That kind of leads me to this other question around like how healing can words like I hear you, I believe you, and I validate your experience be? I'll drop that in the chat as well.
I was going to bring up healing anyway as an answer to the last question. So I think I'll answer this indirectly, which is to say that there's a huge healing power and celebratory power and joy power in finding folks that can validate your experience, or finding folks that might understand your perspective with the intersectional violences that you might experience. So I think community building and like part of the strength of being a survivor who might continue to support other survivors is the connections and the relationships that you continue to build, and to continue growing that network where folks can access the things that work for them the best, because not everyone's going to agree on those things. And to me, that's kind of an indirect answer to this question is, yeah, like if you're seen in the way that you need to be seen by somebody, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'll answer this question similarly but with like a specific example. So I was part of Survivor Services and still am for like 20 years. And this comes from, all the survivors I've interacted with, but then also I was part of like a research project a couple years ago and interviewed a bunch of survivors as part of that project. And one of the things that I have learned working with survivors as well as in that research project is many survivors have told me that the more traumatic thing for them than the abuse itself was having family and friends not believe them. And also like law enforcement and stuff, but in particular, like telling a parent as a child or telling a friend as an adult or a partner and having those people blame them or not believe them. And many of them said, if like the trauma would have been significantly reduced for them if they had been believed and supported by the people who they actually were invested in relationships with. And I think that in itself is kind of an answer to this question, which is like, it means everything to have somebody, particularly somebody that you have a relationship with, validate and believe you. And I think it goes back to transformative justice and just how impactful community is. And that even if individuals do harm, if the community itself can be a space of like believing and validation and healing, it will at minimum significantly reduce the trauma that person, that survivor experiences. So yeah, I don't think you can underestimate how, in my opinion, after I heard that from survivors, I was like, oh, we just need to like train friends and family to be the advocates for survivors instead of like paying ourselves to be the advocates, because I don't think they would even need us if their friends and family could do it, right? It would be, and it would be more meaningful, like having somebody that you have trust and relationship with do advocacy with you is much more healing than having some stranger at a drop-in center do advocacy work with you.
Yeah, all I have to add is that it is partly those words, but not just those words, that really are the healing. It's like people believing you and, helping you and supporting your healing. That is the most important part of that, I think.
I found myself getting a little bit emotional just listening to that. But just want to take a moment to just like reaffirm, like all of us that are here that are survivors. If you haven't heard it, we believe you. Like, and for folks in the back that are listening, maybe washing dishes, and let me restate this, just to be clear: believe survivors, like just believe survivors. Yeah, I don't think that anybody here can say that enough, but yeah, having that piece of around someone actually believing you, listening to you, acknowledging that it's not your fault. Yeah, I just like, I'm saying that to y'all, I'm saying that for myself, like, I believe you. So I just want to hold that because I feel like it's really, really important to continuously reiterate. So thank y'all. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm sorry. I got emotional for a second, so I'm like a little bit thrown off, but I'm just feeling a little tender listening to all this wisdom and just like snapping and affirming. But yes, we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I think that we kind of answered one of these around like accountability, I believe. But I wonder, this other question, do the panelists think that the economic system that we currently live in, i.e. capitalism, impede the manner in which the state and federal government can help the public? Drop this in the chat as well.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Equal
Bo says yes.
I mean, Bo, you said a little bit about that earlier about how like transformative justice is super expensive. And so the government doesn't want to do that kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, ultimately it's probably like way cheaper than having so many people incarcerated. But yeah, I think yeah, good point, Subby. Priorities, right? Like, yeah, they could afford it if they really wanted to. I think that there are ways that government funding works that are about perpetuating the government and the state, and the government is very invested in that, and people within systems push back, and there's like small improvements, but for the most part, the government is interested in investing in services that reinforce the problems and therefore allow us to keep paying ourselves for services, for the services we provide. And like always having a middle person that needs to get paid, or multiple middle people, right? Because like sometimes it's like they pay me and then I pay a nonprofit who's the second middle person, and then finally it eventually gets to a survivor. And they're really interested in like constantly cutting costs to save money for the state. So an example of that is that a person doing advocacy work at the county might make 25 to 30 an hour, and then a person doing the exact same work in a nonprofit that's funded by the county will make like 18 an hour or 17 or 16 an hour, even though it's the exact same work. And those grant RFPs are written in a way that prohibits nonprofits paying better. So yeah, that's just to say like, these are all very well thought out and planned things that bureaucrats have created to make sure that this machine keeps running.
And I also want to clarify, I don't actually believe that transformative justice is expensive. I'm saying that it's perceived that way. And that's because governments in this country run on an election cycle, right? So they want things to be fixable. They want results and benchmarks to be met and outcomes to be counted within a specific amount of time, whether that be 4 years or 1 year. And transformative justice is intergenerational work, and it's hard to report on, and it's hard to show outcomes on how people grow and learn, and how do you prove that people create less harm? How do you prove or report that someone is not perpetuating like the abuse of power that they might have done in the past? So grant cycles, all of that stuff, it's back to the colonial framework of things being binary, things being observable, scientifically like reported and reportable, when relationships and enrichment and learning and healing are not any of those things.
Yeah, I really don't have much to add other than, just saying that government and capitalism are all like work hand in hand. They mutually reinforce each other, perpetuate each other, because it works for them. And a lot of it is about, making people, just basically disposing of people, using them for labor, production of profit, and not interested in justice or healing at all.
Yeah, because it's probably too expensive for the government, right? Like, just in healing for the people, too expensive. War, yes. Prisons, yes. That makes sense. Thank you all so much. I could literally sit here and talk to y'all all night, but I think, is it Friday or Thursday? I'm not sure what day it is. I just know I'm here right now. But I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us as we begin to kind of like close out the day. It is Thursday, Blur's Day. Ah, that's hilarious. But yeah, I want to just like give big gratitude for y'all for sharing your wisdom and taking the time to spend some moments here with us discussing being a survivor and radical imagination and thinking about things beyond like what exists now and building towards a world that most of us, a lot of us can't even really even comprehend or imagine what might be possible. So I appreciate y'all for doing this work and being here and merging art and somatics and abolition and all of the things. And so deep, deep appreciation for everyone. Do y'all have any parting words before we transition into closing out today's event?
Just thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And maybe call a friend sometime. Just say hi.
If that is all, I am going to pass it back over to Christine. Thank y'all so much for letting me moderate and just kind of like pick y'all's brains a little bit. So Christine, back over to you.
Thank you, Zubby, and thank you, everyone. That was such an amazing conversation. Thank you to all the panelists and our lovely facilitator. So wonderful. And we also want to let everyone know that advocacy is available to currently enrolled students of all genders at Portland State experiencing sexual and/or relationship violence and stalking through the Women's Resource Center. This is a free and confidential service. You can find out how to schedule an appointment and get connected to other resources by going to our website at pdx.edu/WRC. And just thank you so much to everyone who attended tonight. Such a wonderful conversation, and everyone who made Take Back the Night possible. And also thank you, Kaylin, our ASL interpreter, and Lydia, our captioner, for also making this accessible to all. Thank you so much.